Alright, so good afternoon, everyone. So for today, we will talk about what we call the hit testing and the moving object. This is the last part of our Module 4 series of video discussion. And for today, we will talk about what we call the moving objects and hit testing. I'm going to show you how to determine if we have clicked inside the shape or particular panel. See, for example, on this the first example program here or demo program, we have two different shapes, a rectangle and a circle. And once we click on them, they gradually begin to fade away. So in this example, we will actually use threads. And this is a great opportunity for us to have a better understanding or at least an introduction to what we call threads in Java programming. Kasi yun din yung magiging katuloy ng discussion natin for the finals. So, for that's the first example. In the second example, on the other hand, we will be creating two shapes that can move with the mouse once we drag them and on the panel and resize them with by just simply using what we call the scroll, yung mouse wheel natin. So, magagamit natin si mouse wheel natin. And in the last example, we will be resizing a rectangle with two controlling points. Ito. So, based on the distances between the rectangle here, yan, kayang-kaya na natin silang i-resize. Okay, so we will actually start our demonstration for today by discussing first what we call the hit testing demo program. So, using IntelliJ, I want you guys to open your IntelliJ and create a Java program named hittesting.java. So, as usual, we can just simply go ahead and create our class here and public class hit testing and extends the JFrame. And together with the main method here, and we are now ready to at least begin our code. So next, we will now try to import the following packages para alam natin kung ano yung mga gagamitin natin. Number one, since meron tayong gagawin dito na related sa transparency, of course, if you can still remember our discussion, we have what we call the alpha composite. Tapos, we will try to at least set the color, initial color, which is in gray, di ba? We also have the event queue, which can be used for threading as well. Tapos, yung dalawang graphics natin dito, which is graphics and graphics 2D. Yan. Java.out.graphics 2D. Next part here is, of course, the render. Yan, yung rendering hints natin. Rendering hints para mas maging maganda or maayos yung pagkaka-render ng bawat shapes natin dito. Hindi siya pixelated or hindi medyo jagged lines. Now, since gagamit din tayo ng mouse events dito, it's important for us to import the mouse adapter. Yan. Mouse out.event that mouse adapter. Yan. Mouse event, mouse adapter. Yan dalawang yan. Kasi, syempre, gagamitin natin si scrolling tapos si clicking. Diba? We will also have here the out, which is the ellipse and rectangle. So, ellipse 2D. Tapos, gagamitin din natin dito si rectangle. And geometry.rectangle 2D. Yan. We will also have here what we call the utility, which is for logging purposes. Yan. Mamaya makikita natin kung para saan nga ba itong mga to. Pero basically for logging or from the word itself, loggers. Sila po yung taga-check kung ano na yung nangyayari. So, taga-monitor ng nangyayari doon sa mismong event na pinapaandar natin. And lastly, the two swing components, which are the JFrame. Yan. And of course, the Java Swing J panel. So that's important. So we already know how to at least import the following packages here. Now, going back to the main method, this is actually where, once again, we will create our event queue that invoke later, then the new runnable method, in which inside the new runnable method is where the public void run is being added. So inside the public void run is where we will now instantiate the object hit testing x, which is the same name with the class. Tapos new hit testing x. Nakalimutan ko yung word na x pala dito. Kaya pala siya error kanina. Yan. Hit text. Tapos let's set the visibility into true. Next here, on this part of the code, which is of course, alam naman natin to, na this is the constructor, and we will call here the InitUI, diba? So, pwede naman natin ulit gawin yun, or para mas makita ninyo, pwede rin natin siyang gamitin na ganito. So, I can just simply instantiate another object. This will be a JPanel. Ayan, yung hit na yan, JPanel. Would like to set the title of our JFrame into hit testing. Tapos, the size of our JFrame, which is 250 by 150. And of course, the default close operation into JFrame that exit and close. Tapos yung location relative to, which is null. So, kung pansin nyo, hindi na tayo tumawag dito ng panibagong method na InitUI. So, para lang mas mabilis. Yan. Pero kung gusto nyo, kung nasanay kayo na may InitUI dito, okay lang din. Next here is for us to create the class hit, in which, of course, dito tayo sa taas. Class hit, and we will extend JPanel on that one. So, inside the JPanel here is we have the constructor, yan, in which we will call a method for InitSurface. Mamaya yan. Next, meron din tayo ditong, wag natin kakalimutan, yung tinatawag natin na yung override annotation natin, diba? Override annotation, and the public void, yan, paint component, tapos graphics G, in which we already know that we will call all the components of the paint component, tapos ibabato natin yan sa doDrawing method. Alam natin yan. So inside the doDrawing method, so we have here the private void doDrawing, yan, private void doDrawing, tapos graphics G, oops, sorry, private void doDrawing, graphics G, and we will try to at least cast the graphics 2D g.create dito sa part na to. Okay. Now, on this part, medyo syempre hindi pa kompleto yan kasi what we will try to do here is, number one, we will try to create first the, what do you call this one? The shapes. Diba? So, you have the following shapes, the rectangle, and you have the circle. So, in order for us to do that, dito muna natin yan i-work on sa may mismong doDrawing natin bago tayo mag-work on sa mga hit na to. Okay? So, first of all, let's set the paint, the color, okay? New color, which is around gray lang yan, pero 50-50-50. Kasi gray lang naman yan, di ba? And we will set here the rendering hints. Yan, para mas maging maayos yung pagkaka-render ng bawat shapes natin. Rendering hints, dot key, underscore anti-aliasing. Tapos, we have the rendering hints, that value, anti-alias on. Yan. So, lagay natin ngayon si rh.put. Lagay natin ngayon dito si rendering hints, that key rendering. And, of course, si rendering hints, that value, underscore render quality naman siya. Yan. So, nilagay ko lang yung properties neto dito sa loob. So, para mas sure na mas maganda yung pagkaka-render niya later on. Now, using the graphics 2D, we will now be setting the rendering hints into RH, which is in value anti-aliasing on. N. Now, initially, we will try to set here the composite. And g2d.setComposite. Oops. Set composite. Yan. Dito natin ilalagay ngayon yung alpha. Okay? So, get instance. The alpha here will be src underscore over. Kasi naka-ano lang siya eh. Nakapatong siya kumbaga. Diba? Tapos, for the alpha rectangle. Take note, for the alpha rectangle po yan. So, yung alpha, itong alpha underscore rectangle na to, this will actually be the variable kung saan natin i-store whatever values ng alpha rectangle natin. So, mamaya, i-declare natin yung variable na yan. Next. After the alpha rectangle, of course, meron din tayo ditong set composite, alpha composite, that get instance, alpha composite that src over underscore over, this time alpha underscore ellipse. So both of them should actually be added. Yan. So both of them should actually be added in the yan. Itong rect na to, which we will also declare later on. Tapos itong ellipse na to. Tapos lastly, we dispose everything. Yan. So kung napansin nyo, meron pang error yan kasi nga hindi pa natin sila totally na declare as a separate variable. So, number one, trabahuin natin tong si rectangle and si ellipse na to. We can just simply use what we call yung in-import natin dito na geometry ellipse 2D and rectangle 2D. So, private rectangle 2D, I'll name that as rect. Tapos, private ellipse 2D, then I'll name them as ellipse. Tapos, meron din yung private float natin na alpha rectangle, in which will automatically get the value of whatever alpha or transparency na meron si rectangle and ellipse later on. Yan. So, nawala na yung error, no? Ayan. So, kung i-run natin yan, tignan natin kung may magpapakita na ba. Of course, by just simply looking at this, wala pa talaga kasi wala pa naman silang position, wala pang value sa rectangle, kung ano yung size niya and whatever. So, hindi pa natin talaga totally alam kung ano yung laman ni rectangle natin. We just simply prepared these shapes. So, in order for us to do that, dito tayo ngayon papasok sa public hit natin or yung tinatawag natin na constructor. This is actually where we will now place what we call the InitSurface method, in which we will call inside the constructor. So, InitSurface, yan, private void InitSurface. Okay. So, dito sa InitSurface na to, I'm gonna use the rectangle and I'm just going to use the rectangle 2D that float with the following values: 20F, the position, 20F, 80F, and 50. This is simply the position and the size of the rectangle. For the ellipse, I'm just going to at least put here ellipse 2D that float, since float values yan. I have 120 position, 30 position, and 30F, 60 yung size or radius ng circles natin. Tapos, initially, I would like to add an initial value of their transparency into 100%, 1F. Ganon din kay alpha ellipse, which is 1F. So, kung i-run natin yan, tingnan natin kung may magpapakita na nga ba. Ayun. So, meron na, no? What we will try to do here is to simply click on the following and the rectangle will gradually decrease its transparency or the alpha itself. So, para ma-achieve natin yan, number one is by adding what we call the AddMouseListener. So, maglalagay tayo ng mouse listener dito talaga sa bawat object niya, sa rectangle and sa ellipse. Kasi nga, pag click natin yon, automatic Java will simply determine the event na kukunin mo or ginawa mo. So, I'm just going to at least declare or instantiate another object here, which is hit testing adapter na tinatawag natin. Yan, hit test adapter. So, si hit test adapter naman, that alone is a separate class. So, ginawa ko yan para makita natin na yung mouse listener na to, once na-click mo tong dalawang to, papasok yan dito ngayon sa hit test adapter. Now, that is as well a separate class. Yan. A separate class yan. We can do class hit test adapter. And this time, ano yung i-extend natin? Si mouse adapter. Yan. Tapos, we will also try to implement what we called runnable. Yung threads natin, kumbaga, na tinatawag natin. Well, of course, as of the moment, magkakaroon pa yan ng error. Kasi nga, hindi pa natin siya totally ginagawa. Diba? Alright, so let's continue. I think there is actually an error dito. Ngayon palang i-fix na natin. This class na nakikita natin, the hit test adapter, this is actually considered as a new object. 'Di ba? So, yung new object na to, pwede natin siyang ilagay mismo dito sa loob na to. Okay? Sa loob lang ni entire class hit naman. So, dito na natin yan siguro ilagay sa ito. Yan. Okay. Hit test adapter. Yan, hit test adapter. So, nawala na, no? Nawala na yung error dito. Tapos, ito, okay na rin siya, hit test adapter. Now, for the hit test adapter, of course, we will create first the override annotation for the following. Number 1, yung public void mouse press. Siyempre, kasi kapag pinindot natin, di ba? So, yun yung gusto natin mangyari. Pag pinindot natin si mouse, what will happen? We will also need to create an override annotation here, a method in which will simply run the entire program. So, ganyan po siya. So, kung napansin nyo na wala na yung error natin dito because of the following methods, especially the mouse press and the run program here. Alright. So, once again, just try to review. Dito po yan nangyayari sa InitSurface. So, once na-create or na-create si rectangle and ellipse dito, automatic naglagay tayo ng mouse listener in which alam natin na ang mouse listener is anything or any events na nandoon sa mouse. It can be either click, drag, scroll up, and so on. So, ang gagawin lang natin is more on click lang. Ito, mouse press lang tayo talaga as of the moment. Okay, now, for the mouse press, para maumpisa natin yan, we need to declare two important variables here. Number 1 is the rect runnable. Gagamitin natin itong si rect runnable na to. And I'll name that as rect animator. Ayan. Tapos si private thread in which we will use as well animator. So ito kasing si rect runnable, kung napansin nyo, that alone is a separate class or separate object. Initially wala pa. Tayo mismo kasi ang maglalagay ng laman nito, ng properties and every single particular events na ginagawa ni rectangle. So, we will try to create that first para mawala lang yung error na to. So, punta tayo ngayon dito sa taas lang niya. We can just simply create here class rect runnable. Yan. We will now be implementing the runnable from the threads itself. So, kung napansin nyo, nawala na to, di ba? Nawala na yung mismong error natin dito kanina. So, I think pwede na tayo makapag-umpisa. And maybe if you are wondering kung saan natin nakukuha itong runnable, the runnable is actually a built-in. Dito po yan. Sa built-in po yan na import packages natin na ginamit natin for today. Dito. Dito rin yan sa event queue. Okay? So, as of the moment, nakikita natin, may error pa itong si rect runnable natin. It's because it's still missing a particular method that we need to use. That is, number 1, the public void run. Okay? Diba? Nung may public void run na, nawala na. And before working out with the public void run, let's declare first the following variable using the thread. I'll name that as runner. Ang ginagawa nito, yan, punta tayo dito. Gawin natin si rect runnable natin na constructor. And I'm gonna call here yan, a method, the initThread, in which si initThread kasi, siya po yung parang starting position natin for the threads itself. So, I'm gonna use the runner. I'm gonna set the thread into this, or to itself, referencing to itself. Whenever you are trying to create a Java program na may threading, it's important to at least instantiate them first. Ito, parang yan, using the thread object. So, pwede kasi itong thread runner equals new thread, parang ganyan. Pero since sineclare natin siya as variable, okay lang din naman siya. Okay, now, the runner that start will simply tell the thread to run once the mouse click happen. Take note, this method here, the Runnable, can happen inside the hit test adapter, which implements the Runnable and extends the mouse adapter method. Ibig sabihin, nangyayari po ito once na nag-click lang tayo. Nangyayari ang threads, nag-activate ang threads once na nag-click lang tayo. Alright? So, dito sa public void run, for as long as the rectangle, the alpha, is greater than or equal to 0. Ibig sabihin, if yung alpha is greater than or equal to 0, ano ang initial value ni alpha natin? It's 1. Ang gusto nating mangyari dyan later on is, pagka-clinic mababawasan. Pero, for as long as the alpha is greater than or equal to 0, mag-repaint lang yan. Pero, ayan na. Kasi di ba 1 ang initial natin eh. So, magbabawas ngayon yan ng 0.01F every now and then. And so, automatic kasi papasok yung program dito. So, alpha rectangle is greater than or equal to 0. So, again, the value of our alpha rectangle is 1F. So, alam naman natin na 1 is greater than 0. So, for as long as pumapasok yan dito sa program na yan, the alpha rectangle will now actually decrease its value up to 0.01F. So, ibig sabihin, like, every time na umaandar yung thread, nagbabawas yan ng 1%. Okay? 1% lang ang binabawas niyan. Now, habang nangyayari yan, you have here a condition na for as long as the rectangle is less than 0. Meaning, hindi pa siya nag-0. Less than 0 eh. 'Di ba? I mean, nag-0 na siya, ibig sabihin nandun na siya sa point na nag-negative na siya. For as long as the value of the alpha rectangle is negative, negative, whatever happens, the value should be 0. Ibig sabihin, no transparency at all kasi there is no negative transparency. Although, we can use the negative transparency pabawas as decreasing lang naman siya. Ito nga, kaya nga dito yan eh. Dito pumapasok yan. Yung negative 0.01F na yan. Okay? So, alpha underscore rectangle is equal to 0. Yan. So, after nyan, kung wala namang papasukin yan, so, punta lang tayo dito sa try-catch method natin you have here what we call the interrupted exception. Kapag ka na-interrupt yung nangyayari sa'yo. Yan. So, dito, we will be stopping the thread once na okay na into 50 milliseconds. So, sabihin, once na na-reach na yung value ni alpha, na at least nag-0 na siya, pag okay na, papasok yan dito sa thread that sleep is equal to 50. Now, for the interrupted exception, maglalagay lang tayo dito siguro ng logger, that get logger, pero actually hindi na kailangan to eh. Surface, class, actually wag na to. Iyan na lang natin ito. Lagay kong comment ito. It's not really important. Kumbaga. So, ganyan siya. Ayan. So, working na yung alpha rectangle natin if ever. Pero kung i-run natin yan, of course, magpapakita lang ito, pero wala pa talaga nangyayari. Because ang winwork out lang natin is once na na-click lang yung rectangle. Unfortunately, the mouse event here, the mouse press, doesn't even actually contain anything. So, in order for us to at least work on that, first of all, we will try to get the position of the click nung mouse natin. Okay? So, pag click niya, automatic yan, didetermine niya kung nasaan yung click niya. And now, you will ask the user if the rectangle contains the value of x and y. Ayan. What will happen? Ibig sabihin na itong that contains, di ba kasi may position to? If the position is inside x and y, so for as long as it is inside x and y value, automatic, the rect animator here will be instantiated. Yan. Dito ngayon mangyayari yung rect animator natin. Itong rect runnable na to. So, it will automatically execute this entire code here, the rect runnable na ginawa natin earlier. Mag-i-start yung thread. Ayan. Magbabawas yung threads niya and so on. Nagets ba natin? So, ganun po siya. Ayan. So, tignan natin. I-run natin yan. Ayan. So, ngayon, wala pa, di ba? So, mamaya, makikita natin kung paano to totally gagana. Kasi, syempre, may kulang pa tayong code dyan. Okay, next. Gawin na rin natin tong si Ellipse. Although, kung napansin nyo, si Ellipse kasi, hindi natin ginawan siya ng separate. Tignan natin ha, kung ano yung magic na gagawin natin for Ellipse. It's actually the same concept. Kasi X and Y, titignan niya. Pero, it will simply check or use the Ellipse animator which is in threads. Built-in po. Okay? Nasa built-in yan eh. Ito kasi, ginawa natin ang Runnable kasi gusto natin na may na modify yung way kung paano siya magbabawas. Ito naman, itong si Ellipse Animator, gagamitin natin si built-in thread na object in which you will see later on. New thread, this. So, parang yung kanina lang din. Tapos, Ellipse Animator dot start. Okay. Siyempre, meron pang error yan. I mean, hindi pa yan totally gagana kasi hindi pa kompleto yung program natin. Ayan, di ba? So, mangyari dapat dito pag pinindot eh. Dito tayo ngayon sa public void run. Yan yung pinakakulang pa natin. So, just like the same concept here ng public void run na to, ganun din siya. Gagawin din natin siya dito. So, while the alpha ellipse is greater than or equal to 0, again, it's the same concept nung rectangle natin pero different way on how we implemented them. We will repaint and we will try to at least negate the value of the ellipse. Ganun siya. Sabihin, magbabawas yung alpha niya. Tapos, si ellipse here will, for as long as it's less than 0, yan, the alpha ellipse will now become 0. Tapos, just like what we have done earlier, yung thread that sleep natin, which is 50, and catch, these are built in ha, interrupted exception X, for example. Tapos, the logger. Hindi ko na rin ilalagay yung logger na yan kasi hindi naman siya totally ginagamit eh. Okay, so tignan natin kung ano ang nangyari sa code natin. Yan. So, tignan natin ha. I-review natin. Number 1, we have the main method here. Okay, so we instantiated a new object hit testing in which the hit testing have the following properties of a J-frame and instantiated another object which is a J-panel named hit. The hit now, etong hit na to, this is the entire hit class. We have the 4 variables na dineclare natin which contains the rectangle, the ellipse, the value of the alpha rectangle or the transparency, and the transparency value of the ellipse. We set the value of the rectangle and ellipse dito as 1F, 100%. Diba? Now, we also have the constructor hit in which simply the InitSurface here is simply the one who actually set the properties of your rectangles and ellipse. So, yung position niya, tapos yung mismong itong size niya. Dito rin natin sinet yung initial value niya for transparency. The InitSurface is also the execution point for MouseListener. I mean MouseListener. Ayan. So, sa MouseListener nito, we instantiated another object which is the hit test adapter in which we created dito sa part na to, the hit test adapter. Ayan. The hit test adapter here simply extends the mouse adapter and dito po nangyayari yung mouse press which implements the threading, yan threads natin or the runnable. Now, we declared 2 different variables here which is the rect runnable which is a separate object for the rectangle. But then, there is also a separate object for thread in which, I know, medyo weirdo kasi pwede naman nating gawan ng separate na runnable si ellipse natin. Pero pinakita ko lang sa inyo na pwede nyo parang gamitin ito. Alright? So, we have 2 different methods for the mouse adapter. We have mouse press and na public void run. Now, every time na nagma-mouse press ka, again, yan, nililista niya and dinidetermine niya kung ano yung position ng mouse mo. For as long as the mouse is inside the rectangle, it will automatically run the rec animator rec runnable, which also simply started the threading. Ito, the threads of the rectangle. Ano ang ginagawa ni threads niya? Pinabawasan natin yung value ni alpha rectangle into negative 0.01 or 1% every particular thread or movement. Kasi pag sinabi natin threads, movements eh. Okay? So, ganun siya. Now, for as long as the alpha rectangle is greater than or equal to 0, patuloy na nangyayari ito until the point na ma-reach niya ang 0. Once na nag-0 na yan, automatic, mag-i-sleep na yan. And it will now go into the next part, which is the ellipse, which basically do the same thing pa rin, pero different lang ng pagkaka-implement. Para makita ko lang sa inyo na different sila ng pagkaka-implement. Now, if we try to run the program, tingnan natin yan. So, ganyan siya. Pagka-clinic natin yan kasi, see what will happen. Yan. So, pag-clinic natin silang dalawa, ayun na po. Ayun, diba? So, nag-ano siya, nawala sila pareho. Ayun. Diba? Yan, ulitin natin. Ayun. Diba? Nag-gradual siya. So, pwede na natin siya sigurong i-screenshot ng mas maayos. Umpisa natin dito sa main method. Okay. Tapos yung mga yung mga packages na need nating import. Followed by the class hit. Tapos yung rendering hints natin. Yan. Any questions so far? Hirap, no? Ganyan talaga. Kailangan nyo lang sundan yung program, and once na gumana na yung program, try to analyze each part of the code para mas maintindihan natin kung paano siya totally nag-work. Pero, in-explain ko naman sa inyo, line per line, kung anong ginagawa nila. Alright, next. We have here another program here, which is really interesting. Kasi mag-move na tayo ng shapes, and we will try to scale them. So this time, meron tayong gagamitin ulit na mouse listener and mouse adapter. Yan. Medyo enjoy to. Medyo mahirap lang i-implement. Pero I want you to at least focus and try to code with me. This is actually being recorded. So if you want to try to at least pause the video, you can do so naman. Okay. So gawin natin to. Let's create here a class in IntelliJ. Ayan, so I have created a class here, moving scaling x. So we have public class, moving scaling x. Tapos we will extend the JFrame. JFrame. And the main method, main string args. Ayan. Next is for us to implement or import first the following packages para mas makita natin ano nga ba yung mga ginagawa. So, napansin natin kasi dito, we have blue and we have green. So, automatic color yan. Yan. We also have event queue. We have at least font. Pero hindi talaga natin magamit yan eh. Lagay ko lang. Out, graphics. We have graphics 2D. We have the rendering hints. Out, rendering hints. We have the event. Mouse event. We have the mouse adapter. Ayan. Tapos, meron din kasi tayong tinatawag na another event, which is mouse wheel. The mouse wheel event. And mouse wheel listener. We will try to implement them one by one later on para makita natin kung paano sila totally mag-work. We have here as well the geometry ni ellipse, tapos si rectangle. Ayan. Tapos, yeah, nakalimutan ko pa pala si javax.swing.jframe and javax.swing.jpanel. Okay, working. So, let's try to work on here sa may method. Ayan, so work on na natin si main method dito. Now, for the main method, we already know that this is actually where we will try to put the following, di ba? Moving scaling x, yan, x is equal to new moving scaling x. Tapos, set the visibility into true. As simple as that. Now, we should have here the public moving scaling x, or what we call the constructor. Tapos, pwede nating ilagay si InitUI dito. Diba? Or, kung gusto nyo, kahit dito nyo yan. Pangalanan natin siyang new moving na small letter. Yung panel natin. We will set the title as well as moving and scaling. Ayan. Moving and scaling. We will set the size 300 by 300. Set default close operation into jframe.exit and close. Tapos, we will try to set the location relative to null. Okay, so let's work on the jpanel here, which is class moving and extends jpanel. Para mawala na to, yung error na to. Okay, so isa-isahin natin to. It's very important for us to work on this one individually. So, number one, ang una kong atake dito is simply declare the variable zRectangle. I'll name that as zRectangle. zRect. Ayan. Tapos si private zEllipse as zel. Ayan. Kung napansin nyo, nag-red siya. Because the zRectangle here is a separate object that we will try to work on later on. Okay? So, ano natin to eh. Gagawin natin yan as a separate naman eh. Separate class, separate object. Diba? So, for now, ano muna natin yan. Comment out muna natin yan. Kasi gusto kong isa-isa natin. Gawin natin dito lagay na natin dito si public moving, which is, in other words, the constructor. The constructor is simply includes or calls the InitUI method, in which the InitUI method is where we will add all the mouse events. Okay? The mouse listener na gagamitin natin dito. So, dito natin ilalagay, add all mouse events here. Mamaya, work on natin yan. Next part is for us to add what we call the override annotation for the paint component. Tama? So, wag natin kakalimutan ito. Si override annotation ni paint component, public void paint component graphics G. Yan. Tapos super the paint component G. Tapos we have here do drawing, which we will call and. So, si do drawing, pasok natin yung dito. Private void do drawing. Okay, so dito of course you have what we call the graphics G inside the parameter of the do drawing method. Yan. And cast na natin siya. Cast natin graphics 2D G2D is equal to graphics 2D G.create or just simply G, pwede na yan. Now, try natin i-send si font dito. Font is equal to new font. Yan na lang natin. Although, hindi natin siya totally magagamit eh. Diba? Pero, baka kasi nakalimutan nyo na eh kung paano. So, properties lang ni fonts. Yan. So, set natin si font. Yan dito as font. Tapos, si rendering hints natin. Yan, si rendering hint, we have the number 1, the key underscore anti-aliasing. Tapos rendering hints Kahit ako nakakalimutan ko to eh. Rendering hints. Yan. That value underscore anti-alias on. So, buti na lang may IntelliSense kasi at least automatic na nagpapakita. Yeah. We also have here another rendering hint, which is the text anti-aliasing. Yan. Key underscore text yan, anti-aliasing. Pasok natin si rendering hints, that value underscore anti-alias underscore on. Nakalimutan ko. Hindi ganyan. Value underscore text. Kasi text ito eh. So, magiging text underscore anti-alias underscore on. So, let's set the paint. Ayan. New color. Gawin natin siyang 00 by 200 for now. Which is in blue. Ayan o. Diba? Tapos, i-fill natin una si rectangle. In which, si rectangle kasi wala pang laman. Ito. Diba? So, wala pang laman si rectangle. So, mamaya, i-work out natin yan. Ganun din dito kay set paint, new color, 0, 200, 0. Tapos, G2D, fill, Z, ellipse, yung kay ellipse. So, for now, wag muna natin i-work si ellipse. Dito muna tayo kay rectangle mag-work on. So, i-activate ko muna ng comment ito, si rectangle. Kasi, importante na makita natin dito, si rectangle, di ba? So, before declaring this class here, gawin na natin tong si InitUI natin, in which the rectangle will have a value of Z rectangle. Tatawagin natin by 50, 50 yung position, 50 yung position, 50 yung size. So, hindi siya totally rectangle but then a square. Okay, so dito rin natin ilalagay si ellipse later on na we have what we call the Z ellipse, and the position is 150 by 70 and they have the same size na 80-80. Pero for now, let's comment that. Okay. So, hindi ko muna ilalagay dito si mouse adapter kasi hindi pa natin siya totally magagamit sa ngayon. Gusto muna nating palabasin si itsura ni rectangle sa code natin. Okay? So, let's leave this as blank. Ganyan po. InitUI, add all else. Okay. So, si rectangle na. Now, si rectangle kasi is actually a class, an object. So, in order for us to do that, just like earlier, nung gumagamit tayo ng threading dito, this is still part of the class moving, okay, na gagawin natin. So, para gawin natin yan dito sa baba ni override annotation. So, we have here class Z rect, and Z rect, tama ba? Spelling ko, yan, Z rectangle. Ganun po siya. Kung napansin nyo, nawala na yung red dito, di ba? So, ganun. Now, for the rectangle, since this is rectangle, we can just simply extend the rectangle 2D object na ginagamit natin usually for this one. Rectangle 2D.float. Ayan. So, gagamitin natin kasi ito para hindi na tayo mahirapan na i-set siya later on. Now, on this part, you have to create of course, the constructor. This time, you have the following parameters. You have number 1, the parameter of x. Number 2, the position of y. Number 3, the width. And number 4, the height of the rectangle itself. Okay. So, iset natin ngayon si rectangle. So, kung napansin nyo, rectangle, ang ginagawa natin nung wala yung si extends rectangle 2D.float na yan, magiging ganito yan. Rectangle 2D.float, tapos dito yung value niya. Pero in this case, it's a separate one. Since we already extended them, we can just simply use the set rectangle method. And this time, lalagyan na natin si width, si height niya. So, ano yung magiging laman nito? Ano yung magiging laman? Saan natin siya kukunin? Dito po natin siya kukunin sa whatever na binato natin dito sa InitUI method na nanggaling sa constructor ni moving. So, alam natin na ang value ngayon ni rectangle is 50-50, 50-50. So, dito po yan. Okay? Now, we will try to create the following methods here. Number 1, we will declare a boolean for as long as the rectangle is hit. You have two options. You have float x and you have float y. Mamaya kasi importante yan. Kapag kaklinik natin sa rectangle, ano ang mangyayari? Yan. So we will try to return the bounds 2D, which is actually the position, okay? The position of x and y values ng cursor mo. Yun yung i-return nito. So it will simply return a value na float value lang siya. Once na na-click natin later on. Again ha, pag na-click, pero hindi pa natin ginagawa si click kasi wala pa tayong mouse listeners. Mamaya yun. Next is we have the public void addX. Okay. This part naman, the addX method, this is where we will try to add an x value to the rectangle once na click natin and dinadrag natin siya pataas. Yan. Dinadrag natin siya pa horizontal, I mean. Sorry. Yan. This dot x plus or equal the value of x. Ganyan yan. So, ibig sabihin, pag click natin yung rectangle, tapos i-drag natin dito sa right, magdadagdag ng value. Ganun siya. Same goes through with public void add y. We have y as well. Dami, no? Oops. Ayan. This that y plus or equals to y. We also have public void add width. Yan. Kumbaga pag nag-scroll up ka, ngayon madadagdagan yung size ng rectangle mo. So this time we have this that width plus or equals to w. Tama ba? W nga ba to? Yeah. Tapos si public void add height. Yan. We have float h, this that width plus or equals to h. Simple as that. Yeah, so napansin natin, gumawa tayo talaga ng separate object for z rectangle or for the rectangle itself na tinawag natin yun dito sa loob ni InitUI. So ngayon, si InitUI na yan, sinet natin si value niya into 50-50, 50-50, pero sinet lang natin. Now, we set the color inside the do drawing and we actually fill the rectangle. Let's try to run this program if gagana na nga ba. Yun. Diba? But then, hindi nyo pa nakikita kasi hindi pa totally nag-work ito. Hindi pa siya clickable. So, I think it is safe to say for us na pwede na rin natin umpisahan tong si Ellipse natin. Para at least nandiyan na. Mamaya i-modify na lang natin. So, let's open this comment, z Ellipse. And the value of the z ellipse here, the zel, yan, z ellipse capital E. Okay, so just like the entire z rectangle here, we will also do this, redo this one, pero this time class z ellipse, tapos extends natin. Ano i-extends natin dito? Ellipse 2D that float naman siya. Ayan, ellipse 2D that float naman. So, we have the constructor ellipse with the following parameters: float x, float y, float width, float height. Ayan. Z ellipse, dapat capital ito. Okay. Tapos, we will now set the frame of the ellipse into x and y, width, and the height itself. So, pareho dapat yan dito, ha. Alright, so just like nung kanina, ganun din. I think pwede nga natin lang itong i-copy and paste. Tingnan nga natin. Copy and let's paste that. Yan. This is hit, float x, float y, get bounds 2D that contains xy, add x, add y, add width, and add height. So I think everything is working perfectly fine. Are we allowed to use the same variables? Yes, because they are actually in the different classes. So, kahit na x ang ginamit ko dito at x ang ginamit ko dito, they still contain different values later on. Tandaan nyo yan. So, ellipse po. So, I can just simply open this comment and we'll try to see kung mag-work na si ellipse, kung magpapakita na. Ayun. Diba? So, okay na. Nagpakita na si ellipse dito. Now, this part of the program is where we will now try to implement the mouse click and the mouse wheel button. Tandaan natin yan. Napaka-importante itong part ng program na to kasi dito natin madidetermine kung paano nga ba. Madali lang magpalabas na ito eh, di ba? Super dali. Pero the problem there is how we will try to implement this one. So, number one, punta tayo dito sa InitUI natin. As I have mentioned here, add all. The mouse events will be added here inside the InitUI. So, in the InitUI, you should have the following. Number one, the moving adapter. This is a separate class. Ayan, new moving adapter. Ito, kung pansin nyo, red pa siya, di ba? Kasi we declared that as a new class ulit. We will also add here the mouse listener. We will put the MA there. Tapos, the mouse listener, mouse motion. Yan, mouse motion listener. Yan. Tapos, itong mouse wheel listener na to. Si mouse wheel listener, meron siyang separate na tinatawag natin na scale handler object na gagawin din natin later on. Pero mamaya na. Isa lang muna. Ito muna tayo. We'll try to work on with the implementation of mouse listener and mouse motion listener na tinatawag natin. In order for us to do that, we can just simply work on with the moving adapter method. Now, the moving adapter method is simply a method that extends the mouse adapter class. It has the following methods such as the mouse press, mouse drag, tapos yung once na na-drag mo kasi, di ba, nagpapalit dapat ng values x and y mo. So, doon natin yun ilalagay. Okay, so paano ko ba to, saan ko ba to ilalagay? Medyo madami na class ellipse, saan ba siya mas magandang ilagay? Sa baba na lang ni rectangle. Ito, para mas malinis. Class rectangle. Yan. So, we have class moving adapter. Moving adapter. Yan. Tignan natin kung natanggal yung error na to. Natanggal. That's important. That's actually how you code in Java or in any programming language. Ako kasi personally, I really prefer debugging my code instantly habang kinocode ko siya. Ayoko nakakita ako ng error hanggat maaari. So, umpisa pa lang. Yan. So, kapag nakakita na ako ng error, tinatry ko na agad siyang isolve right away. Yan. So, class moving adapter, but this time, I'll be extending the what we call mouse adapter. Kasi may mga method yan such as the mouse press. Two important variables, the x and y. Importante yan kasi diyan natin i-store yung values ni x and y kapag gumawa tayo ng something eh. So, put the override annotation for public void mouse press. Ayan. For the mouse press, you have here mouse event E. Ayan. And you have mouse drag. Built-in po yan ha, yung mga yan. Mouse event E naman. So, lagyan natin na override annotation din to. Override. For the mouse event E, gusto ko siyang ibato sa panibagong method in which we call the private void do move. Kasi move natin siya eh. Mouse event E. Yan. Mouse event. So, tignan natin. Ang in-implement ko dito, mouse listener and mouse motion listener. Okay. Sige. So, umpisa natin si pressed. Once we press the mouse, what will happen? It will get the value of the mouse press and will automatically get the value of the y itself. Kung irara natin to, so tingin nyo may mangyayari na kaya? Alright, so tingnan natin. Diba? Kapag na mouse press lang. Ayan. So, sa ngayon wala pa. Diba? Sa ngayon wala pa. Pero, we will try to put here a very simple system.out.println. Tingnan natin. The value of x pressed plus x tapos backslash n, backslash n, the value of y pressed plus y. So, tingnan natin kung magpaparamdam na ba yung mouse or moving adapter natin dito sa part na to, di ba? Okay. So, makikita natin dapat dito kung meron na. Ayun. So, meron na pala. Okay? So, nakikita natin for every click na ginagawa ko dito sa mouse, ayun o. Kung nag-click ako dito sa 00, 00 lalabas dito. Nakita nyo? So, wala ka ng problema dito pa lang eh. Kasi working na pala ito. Itong si mouse press. Kasi nag-mouse press ka na. So, can safely assume na pwede nating i-work on din si mouse drag natin at the same time. Si mouse drag naman, which was transferred into the do move method, dito naman, we will simply declare two variables, the dx, which is e.getX. Parang kanina din eh, pero minus x. Explain ko mamaya kung bakit. Tapos e.getY position minus the position of y. Okay. So, ibig sabihin, pagka-clinic mo, tapos drinag mo, kinukuha mo yung value ni x and y mo, pero nagma-minus ka rin ng value na yon. We will see and we will try to realize why. Okay. Now, if the ZREC is actually hit, tatawagin natin yung ZREC is hit natin. Ito. Ayan. Take note, if the ZREC is hit, which we will try to call this method here, the is hit method, which has a parameter of float x and y value. Okay? Ano ang mangyayari? Kasi ang hit and y, ang is hit natin dito, kukunin natin kung ano man yung value ng position na binabato. I mean, na pre-nest natin kanina. Like nun ha, kung ano yung pre-nest natin na kanina. So here we have x and y. Yan. So si x and y pala will simply, this particular method here will simply return the value of the x and y and the boundary, the 2D boundary of the rectangle itself that contains the x and y. So for as long as kiniklik mo yan, okay, for as long as kiniklik mo yan, the ZREC now will simply add the value of x, in which yung addX method here simply adds the value of x. Take note ha, nag-add ka lang ng value ng x kapag ka click mo, tapos drinag mo na siya ng pagganon. Add x. So we have here dx, which is the value of this one, and the ZREC, which is the value of y. Ayan, add y dy. Lastly, do not forget to have the repaint method. Tignan natin kung mag-work na nga ba to. Nag-work na siya, but then medyo nagloloko pa siya. Diba? Ayan o. Nag-work naman na siya eh. Pero may kulang pa sa program natin, in which we will try to fix. Para mas maayos, yung value kasi ng x, kukunin natin yung value ni dy. Ganun lang. Para mas maging maayos yung pagkaka-click and drag natin. For now. Ayun. Diba? So, masyadong mabilis yung pangyayari. Diba? But then, everything is actually happening inside this method. The to-move method naman. So, ganun din sa ito, kay ZL. Okay? For as long as tinawag natin si hit value, which is x and y, tawagin natin si ganyan. Tapos si add y method inside that, dy. Tapos si repaint as well. Run natin. Okay. Nag-work na siya. You even have the value of x and y kung saan ka nag-press. Run natin. Ayan. Ganun din dito. Diba? So kapag ka, ayan no, nakakatawa yan eh. Saka na tayo magdadagdag ng collision. Pero sa ngayon, separate topic kasi ang collision detection eh. Na kapag ka nagdikit sila, hindi dapat pwede. Ito kasi in this case, yan. Kumbaga para kang gumagawa ng yung Pac-Man, kung natatandaan nyo, or yung snake na once na dumikit, mag-add, ayan na, parang ganyan ang Pac-Man. I mean, yung weird na ball. Okay. Next. Okay na, na-implement na natin yung drag. Ang next na implement natin ngayon is dito, balik tayo dito sa may mouse wheel listener na tinatawag natin. Because what we will try to do here or use here is actually the mouse wheel itself, yung scroll natin. So every time na nag-scroll tayo pataas, the value of, the shapes are actually expanding or at least decreasing. So tanggalin natin yung comment na to. Pwede na siya dito. So you have an error here, the scale handler, in which you can simply do that. Yan. Scale handler. Okay. So gawin natin si scale handler naman na method. So pwede natin yung ilagay dito sa So this is the moving adapter. This is the dulo. Okay, dito na lang. Class scale handler, in which we will try to implement the mouse wheel listener. Sa mouse wheel listener, meron kang tinatawag na public void mouse wheel moved na method, in which na kapag ka nakadetect ng scrolling, what will happen? So the mouse wheel moved method will now be transferred to another method here, which is a do scale method na para lang mas magandang tignan. Mouse wheel event E. So, parang yung kanina, di ba? So gawa tayo dito ng int x value, which is e.get x, position ulit ng click natin, get y. Now, if the event, we have here the scroll type. If the scroll type is actually wheel unit scroll, sabihin kasi ng unit scroll, every time na nagaganyan ka, okay, every time na gumaganyan ka, automatic, may nangyayari. So, titignan niya muna kung sino yung na-hit mo. So, first of all, if the Z rectangle is actually hit, what will happen? That's the question. Diba? So, again, tatawagin niya tong method na is hit, which contains x and y value, which simply, in layman's term, titignan niya lang na for as long as the mouse click is inside the rectangle, since kinuha mo yung boundary, diba? What will happen? You have here the float amount, which will simply get the value of the wheel rotation. Yan. Tapos, multiplied by 5f. Lalayan natin yung because the amount here will simply, or the amount variable will simply be the amount that you will add in the add width and the add height method na ginawa natin kanina dito. Kung napansin nyo, the width will automatically be added into the value of the W itself, in which the value of the W is, alam natin na width yan, at ang value nito is kung ano yung binato natin dito sa ito. Ayan. Ang saya talaga ng object-oriented programming. Napakagulo na ito pagka hindi mo OOP pagka isang main method lang. Super gulo nito. And so float amount is equal to e.get wheel rotation multiplied by 5f. Ayan. So we have zrec that add width. Tapos kung ano yung amount niya, add height. Sabay nangyayari yan and repeat. Alright, so let's try to run the program and see if something is happening. Ayan. So once again, nilagyan muna natin dito si rectangle pa. Okay? So nakiklik sa rectangle, nadadrag siya. Now let's try to use the mouse wheel. Yeah, medyo weird, diba? Gumagana siya, pero medyo weird ang pagkaka-scale niya. in which we will try to fix as well later on. Kung baka may naging problema lang tayo dito sa may add width and add height na tinatawag natin. So for the add width, tignan natin maigi yung add width ng rectangle natin. Float W, which is okay naman. This dot width plus or equals okay naman. So mamaya titingnan natin kung ano nga ba talaga or saan nga ba tayo nagkaroon ng problema. So I think it is also safe for us to implement the Z ellipse na rin, no? So mouse wheel moved. Oops. And mouse wheel move, do scale in x, e.get x, e.get y. Scroll type is equal to mouse wheel event. Tama. So wala namang problema sa code natin. So tignan natin later on. Ito, gawin natin si Z ellipse is hit x and y. Tapos si float amount is of course the same, get wheel rotation multiplied by 5f. Yan. Tapos ibato natin si value ni width, which is the amount, value ni height, which is still the amount, and repaint method. Wow, 196 code na tayo. Lines of code. So we'll see. So working. Yan, medyo weird yung pagkakaano niya. No? Kung napansin nyo, medyo baliktad. Yan, medyo baliktad yung pag-upscale niya. Yan, Ang gusto kasi natin mangyari dapat pag ganun. Gumaganon siya. So tingnan natin, may nakaligtaan tayo sa code natin. Yan. Although nag-i-scroll siya. 'Di ba? Nag-i-scroll siya eh. Ayan, so nung nakita ko, dito lang siya sa may width and height natin. So napagbaliktaran ko lang. So try to at least check your code kung pareho tayo. Ayan, dito. May mga instances kasi na nakakapagbaliktad yan eh. So, ganun din dito sa Z rectangle, kay Z ellipse, ganun din. For the moving adapter, so far so good naman. Wala ka ng problema dito. Itong si scale handler, do scale E, which is, I think, correct naman. Okay, run natin ulit. Napagbaliktad eh. Ayun. So, ganun po siya dapat. Ayan, di ba? Ayan. Lumalaki yung circle na. Ayan. Palitan ko nga. Ayan. So that's how moving and scaling is working in Java programming naman. Na? Question so far? Medyo alam ko mahaba-haba yung code pero ganyan talaga ang sa essence ng coding natin. Maiksi pa nga yan eh, 200 lines. Maiksi pa yan. So, screenshot tayo ngayon. Screenshot this part, the main method. So far so good. Alright, this part. Iisa ko lang ito. Okay. The do drawing methods and the paint component. Okay. The class Z ellipse, which is basically the same with the Z rectangle method. And Z rectangle is actually the same. Ganito to. Yan. Moving adapter method. The moving adapter method, okay, this is where the mouse press and mouse drag is implemented. And the scale handler method, There you go. Okay, so let's move on to our next discussion, the last part, which is what we call the resizing rectangle program. Now, for this program, in this example here, we show how to resize a shape. Now, our shape is a rectangle, and on the rectangle, we draw two small black rectangles by clicking on these tiny rectangles and dragging them. So, gagamit ka ulit dito ng mouse event. Diba? And we can resize the main rectangle by just simply dragging these tiny rectangles that we have. Okay. So, gawin natin. Implement natin yan. Let's name that as resizing rectangle X. Public class resizing spelling ito rectangle X extends JFrame. Okay. Tapos public static void main string orgs method, and the event queue invoke later new runnable, and the resizing rectangle x is equal to new resizing rectangle x. Tapos set the visibility x that set visible. Wala pa pala. True. Okay, so implement ko natin para mas mabilis. Javax that swing that ganyan. How about the mouse events? Andito na yan sa loob ng out. So, kahit yung dalawa na yan, andyan naman na lahat. So, alam naman natin kung ano na yan. In the class, we have here the constructor, public resizing rectangle X, tapos InitUI. Diba? So, private void InitUI. Let's simply call the JPanel here. Let's name that as resize. Let's set the title as resize rectangle. Tapos the set size is simply 300 by 300. JFrame.exit and close. Location relative to null. Okay. So, okay na yan. Ito tayo. Sa resize, we have the class resize here. Now, for the class resize, we have we need to extend the JPanel. We already know that. And we have here the constructor, in which I will simply call the InitUI ng constructor natin. The InitUI is where the mouse events will happen. Dito, mouse events here. Now, let's create the override annotation for public void. Yan. Public void paint component. Graphics G. Tapos dito, tawagin natin si super.paint component, graphics G, and we will simply use to drawing. Diba? Private void do drawing G or graphics G, I mean. Ayan. Tapos graphics 2D, G2D is equal to the casting of graphics 2D G. Ayan. Alright, ang gusto nating mangyari kasi dito sa program natin, you have two smaller rectangles. So, magde-declare tayo ng variable dito para sa dalawang to, and one rectangle here. Ito, i-fill kasi natin to Fill ito, tapos ito is draw lang siya. Or, simple rectangle 2D lang siya. Now, the challenge there is how are we going to drag. I mean, the drag and the clicking part is easy, pero the way on how we resize that is somehow the most challenging part. Kasi titignan niya i-relative niya yung position ni rectangle dito, depende kung ano yung magiging position X and Y ni first rectangle and second rectangle mo. So in order for us to do that, let's declare the following variables. Number one, we have the points. We have here the point 2D. Okay. The point 2D here is simply another, okay, this is another class na gagawin natin which simply determine the exact position of the rectangles itself based from the two rectangles. So we have final int, the size, which is 8. Tapos we have here the position as well. So gawin natin to. This is array. Diba? So this is array. And I think mas maganda muna kung gawin natin tong si array as a, what you call this one, as a separate, diba? As a separate Java.out. So I think nakalimutan natin lagay dito yan eh. Meron tayong point. Yan, para makita natin na ito, siya po yung gumagamit yan. So you have point 2D points. Okay. Alright, next. Let's try to at least remove this. Remove this error here. Hindi kasi natin siya totally na instantiate pa eh. So we can just simply instantiate that here dito sa loob naman ng InitUI natin. Now we can just simply set the points, okay, as new point 2D which has this 2 value. Yan. So ibig sabihin yung initial points niya, okay, well, or I mean the size of the array here is simply 2. So size lang naman niya is 2 eh. Ito lang. 2 points lang siya. So 0, 1 ang paglalagyan natin. So si position 0, 1, okay, position 0, 1 naman will now have a point 2D double. Oops. Point 2D double with a value of 50 by 50. Kung napansin nyo na wala yung error, di ba? Kasi nga, we instantiated them dito sa part na to. Hindi siya totally class eh. Nandito kasi yan sa yun nga, yung point na to. Out that point, tinatawag natin. We have the second position of the 1, which is new point 2D. The second position is 150 by 100. So, ganyan siya. Dot double pala to. Kung napansin natin yan, this is 50-50. Yan. Tapos this is 150 by 100. 150 by 100. So, yun yung magiging position ng dalawa na rectangles natin. Now, dito naman sa may part ng do drawing natin, gagawa tayo dito ng for loop in which inside the for loop, we will try to get the position of x and y every time na dinadrag and drop natin siya. Okay? Every time na dinadrag and drop natin siya. So, meron na tayo dito ng graphics 2D which is G. We have for loop. Now, for the point 2D, which is point, for every point, yan, for every point na dadaanan niya, okay, for every point na dadaanan niya, we will try to get the value of the x value of point, yan, minus size, divide by 2, tapos double y, point, that get y, minus size, ano yung size? 8, diba? So, divide by 2. So, basically, tinitignan natin yung position eh. Kinukuha lang natin yung exact position niya for this one. Tapos, saka natin i-fill yan yung magiging fill ng panibagong rectangle natin. 2D dot double, yan, x and y, whatever value na lumabas dyan, and the size will be, yan, will be 8. Okay, the size is very small, which is 8. Alam naman natin to. Diba? So, again, ang ginagawa lang nito is tinitignan lang natin kung kapag kadrinag natin siya, nasaan yung position niya. So, every time nakadrag yan, of course, nag-fill lang paulit-ulit yung rectangle na to. Ganun po siya. So, that's inside the for loop. So, 2 beses lang naman umiikot yan eh. And, we have here the rectangle 2DR is equal to new rectangle 2D. Oops. Rectangle 2D dot double, ayan, medyo mahaba to eh, ayan, So I instantiated a new rectangle 2D. The purpose of this one is simply the rectangle. Yung pangalawang rectangle natin, yung ito. So it will simply determine the frame from diagonal. So i-determine niya from the frame from diagonal ito. So from point 1 to point 2, ibig sabihin, titignan niya, not the distance itself, pero alam niya kasi na kapag may point 1 and point 2, pwede ka ngayon makapag-drawing ng rectangle from diagonal itself. And kaya nga may set frame from diagonal tayo. Which is, ano yung points na yun? The two different points, which are point 0 and points 1. Which is, ganun lang. Tapos, G2D, we will simply draw that. Kung i-run nyo to, syempre, tingnan natin. Diba? So, may nakita na tayo. Pero hindi pa natin siya totally pwedeng i-drag. Ayan o. Diba? Pero itong unang rectangle na to, dito yan, yung position na yan. Ito yung fill rectangle na yan. Itong pangalawang rectangle na to was based from the diagonal position. So every time na nag-change yung position nilang dalawa, nag-change din yung rectangle dito. Alright, next is actually for us to work on with the mouse events already. Now, for the mouse events here, dito na tayo sa may init UI natin, we can just simply use or add a mouse listener to each points na meron tayo. So, we have what we call the new shape test adapter in which we will do. Next, and that's a new class. Tapos, meron ka ditong motion listener which is shape test adapter. Ayan. Now, for the position, the initial position is nothing, pero we will try to give that as -1 as its initial position. And we will try to realize later on why. Usually kasi negative muna yan, hindi pwedeng mag-0. Sa ngayon. Okay. Now, for the shape test adapter here, this is where we will now put the mouse adapter natin. Kung dito kasi mangyayari yung, kumbaga, pag nag-click ka, nag-drag ka, what will happen? So, dito yan. Just below the paint component method, we have the private class shape test adapter, and let's extend mouse adapter. Okay, so may mouse adapter ka na yan. So, override natin, lagay muna natin si public void mouse pressed with a mouse event, and let's name that as E or event. Tapos, another override annotation for mouse release. Mouse released. Mouse event. Event. Tapos, another override annotation for public void mouse dragged. Mouse event. Event. Ayun. Now, kung napansin nyo, tatlong method yan. Ibig sabihin, once you click, once you drag, and once you release the mouse, something should happen. Okay, so ganun yun, no? Tatlo. For the mouse pressed, gawa tayo dito ng variable kung saan natin i-store yung, kung ano nga ba yung point na clinic muna natin. Point P. Ayan. Kung ano nga ba yung point na clinic muna natin. So, get point. Saan nakikita si get point natin dito? Yung mouse press natin. Okay. For every time na gawa tayo na for loop dito. Points.length is simply 2, di ba? For every time na nagki-click tayo ng mouse, we are just simply storing the value. Tandaan nyo the value of the position, okay, yung x natin minus the size divided by 2. Ini-store lang natin yung position niya dito sa dot get y minus size divided by 2. Yan. So, ini-store natin. So, if this is 0, the point 0 will now get the value of x press mo minus the size minus 2, which is the size is 8 divided by 2. So, 4. So, ibig sabihin, yung magiging value ngayon ni double x will be actually the value of press mo itself. So, kung saan mo siya press. Ganun din kay y. Now, you have here the rectangle, yung rectangle 2D which is R. Tapos create tayo dito ng rectangle 2D dot double x, y, the size, and the size. So what will be the new position of each rectangles? Tandaan nyo yan, the new position of each rectangles na ginawa natin. So if R, the rectangle contains the point, and if the rectangle contains the point, the position will now be depending on the position of the rectangle, which is I, and it will simply return to the top, from the top. Ganun po siya. So, syempre, pagka clinic nyo yan, wala pa namang mangyayari kasi mouse press pa lang yan. Diba? So, kapag ka nag-drag ka dito, once na nag-drag ka ng something, yan, so, kung na-clinic mo, na-determine mo na yung value ng x and y, alam mo na rin kung saan mo ilalagay yung new rectangles mo. Diba dito? Sa loob ng ganyan. Now, for the mouse drag, every time na nagda-drag ka, you have here an if statement. For as long as the position is -1, basically, it's a Boolean value. Return. Otherwise, yan, the position of the POS, ano nga ba ulit yung POS natin dito? The POS is equal to I, yan, or initially wala pa siyang value, pero since naglagay tayo ng value na -1 as the position itself, for as long as the position is -1, nothing will happen. But then, if the position, or actually something happened, nag-drag ka, it will simply get the point, yan, then repaint. So basically, kapag dinadrag mo yung point na to, pag nag-drag ka sa point na to, the position will automatically be -1, okay, be -1, or I mean, it will simply get a value of either 0 and 1. So kapag ni-release mo yung mouse mo, lagay tayo ngayon ng value na -1. Ganun po siya. Again, na-click ka, diba? So na-click ka ng point doon sa dalawang rectangle na yon. Na-determine mo na yung position ng mouse press mo. So after determining the position of your mouse press, you try to drag them. Automatically, the position value is either 0 or 1 lang siya. Depende kung ano yung number, ano yung rectangle na clinic mo. 0 or 1 lang siya. So, automatic, ma-ignore to, then it will simply, repaint the position of the new rectangle na clinic mo, and kung nasan yung point na yun pagka-drinag mo. Ganun siya. Kasi ito, nag-change to every now and then eh. The value of double X and the double Y, nag-change yan. Every time na kiniklik mo, every time na dinadrag mo, nag-change yan. And nagre-repaint yan ng paulit-ulit. Now, if you release the mouse, the position will be back at -1. And so on. Ulit-ulit lang po na ganun. So, tingnan natin if mag-work yung program natin. Ayan. So, click natin. Dapat wala kang unclickable po itong rectangle na to. Yes. So, pwede na. Di ba? Ayan. So, you just simply need to at least analyze each part of the code in order for you to at least solve the performance checks na meron tayo. So, try natin i-review ulit. We have the main method and the initUI method in the class, followed by the panel, and tapos the do drawing and the paint component, and dalawang to, and the shape test adapter, which is the most important part of the code. Alright, so I think that's actually the last part ng ating discussion dito sa module number 4. Very challenging talaga yung mga discussion natin. Now, let me discuss the written works na meron tayo. For the written work, this is if you were able to debug this program. Napakadaming error. Ayun, nakikita nyo yung mga red na yan. Those are errors. So, if you were able to debug this one, this will be a bonus point sa inyo para masagutan nyo rin yung tetrahedron problem na meron tayo from the previous module, from module 3. So, pwede nyo i-copy-paste yung magiging sagot nyo dito na tamang sagot para masagot nyo yung tetrahedron na problem. Ganun din dito sa number 2, the 8x8 grid. Makikita ninyo na once na nag-work ito, of course, bonus na rin yan. The screensaver app will also serve as a bonus once na napagana nyo itong program na to. As simple as that. But the challenge here is the performance check. You have to modify these programs. Itong transparent rectangle, magiging circle siya. The composition, and you will simply replace all the rectangles into other shapes such as triangles, mga ganyan. The spotlight, and babaguhin mo rin, should also be resized into a bigger spotlight comparing from the example. So, nagbigay ako dito ng way kung paano mapalaki si spotlight. For number 4, you will also modify the clipping. Yan, by replacing the image that you have chosen. This time, instead of a circle, make the shape into a rectangle as a shape being used to perform the clip in the program. So, ganun po siya. Number 4. Number 5, clipping shapes modified. So, you will be replacing the rectangle into a rounded rectangle and replacing the circle into an oval. Medyo challenging ito, but then the code is being provided to you guys for as long as nasundan nyo yung activity or yung mga demonstration natin. The hit testing program, yan, replace the rectangle shapes into a rounded rectangle and the circle as oval. Once hit, they will gradually begin to fade away, but this time add a 5-second timer delay from the hit up to the fade. So, challenge, di ba? So again, sige, kung wala na po tayong question, goodbye everyone.